Hello everyone and welcome to the round 8 of Chess Olympiad 2024. We are covering India's run in this Olympiad, and today India was playing against the very strong Iran team, which was also very as young as the Indian team with two 2700s on the first board and a very strong 25 and 2600s on the last two boards. So we will move on directly to the games here. The first board we were having Gukesh versus Parham Maksudlu, who is a very strong grandmaster with a very unique style of play, who takes a lots of risk in his games, and generally his games are mostly um, decisive. So it was nice to see Gukesh playing him, who also very rarely loses. So Maksudlu is white here, and he goes for the d4 opening, queen pawn. White goes d4, black goes d5. Gukesh plays solidly in this game. White goes c4, e6, knight c3, c5. So he's going for the terrace defense, which is well known for his very solid setup. Like if black plays well, black can very rarely lose this game. So white goes cd5, ed5, knight f3, knight f6, g3, knight c6. This is all very well known theory. Bishop g2, dc5, cd4, knight d4, bishop c5, knight b3, bishop b6. So this cd4 bishop c5 variation became popular like a few years back, and this is called the Dubov terrace because he was the first one to popularize this, and this is now very well known as a very solid line for black. White goes castle here, d4, knight a4. Even though it might look that white is threatening a pawn here, but it actually doesn't really work. So if after castles, white had gone like knight b6, ab6, bishop c6, bc6, queen d4, black generally can go something like bishop a6 and has a lot of pressure on the white pawns here, and also white has given up this strong g2 bishop. So this is one of the ways white could have played, but it is just a draw. So white goes rook e1, h6, stopping any kind of bishop g5 ideas. Bishop f4, bishop e6, knight c5, bishop d5. Here black could have gone something like this, so that white doesn't get the opportunity to take on b6 and double up the white black pawn. But this is also fine. Here white goes knight b6. What he should have gone for is knight b7 directly, because if black now goes something like queen d7, he can go back like knight c5 after grabbing the pawn. So black has to go something like queen e7, guarding the c5 square, so that the knight can't return from here. But now white can take on b6, ab6, and a very strong move here, e4, hitting the bishop, trying to open up the e file, hitting the queen, and indirectly saving the white's knight. If here black goes d into e3, white can go rook e3, queen b7, bishop d5, and white ends up a pawn up, but black has enough compensation to go keep the game going. But white makes a mistake and goes for knight b6 first. Black takes, knight b7, queen d7, e4. So he had the same idea, but the move order was wrong, and it makes all the difference in the world. And now we can see the difference, because in our variation after rook e3, the e7 queen was attacked, but here it is not, and that makes all the difference in the world here. Black goes knight b5, and it is almost now very clear to white that this knight is not really coming out. White plays knight d6, bishop g2, king g2, rook d8, trying to go queen c6 and hitting the knight. White plays rook b3, knight d5, threatening knight f4 and queen d6, bishop e5, and queen a6. So we can see that this queen is attacking the e5 bishop and threatening rook d6 also. So one of the minor pieces are going to fall, or black can get two minor pieces for the rook. White goes queen d4. Here Gukesh goes knight g4. I think this should have been enough, which is very much similar to yesterday's game against Wei, where Gukesh converted this two knight versus rook. There also like was the pawns were on the two flanks, but here I think it's much easier for black because the queen and rook are present on the board. But Gukesh plays knight g4, rook d1, knight e7, bishop g7. So it's very complex position. Black can go knight f5. White is threatening bishop into f8. Black can go even rook d6, queen d6, king g7. But after something like this, white can just take and rook d6. So black doesn't go for rook d6. Black goes for the best line, that is knight f5. Here the point is, if white goes queen g4, then black goes knight e3. This covered attack and picking up the queen. If white goes something like knight f5, then black can just go queen f5 here, and queen f4. Black will just take gf4, rook d1, bishop f8, king f8, and rook b6. With only these two pawns remaining and these two strong pass pawns, I think white will be able to hold the game. But Parham here goes for the best move actually, queen f4, which is an very interesting move because g7 bishop is hanging, d6 knight is hanging, some kind of knight e3 might come, even rook d6 is a threat. But none of those work because f8 is hanging also. So Gukesh just takes the bishop, white takes rook b6. So after all the complications, it is clear that white is not really that worse here because black has a piece, but white has three pawns for it and are very active pieces. Black goes f5 here. Here, white could have started pushing the pawns with a4, a5, and made black's life very difficult here because these two knights are very out of the game, and with the pawns coming down the board, it will be not so easy to defend. But white plays h3, which is a really bad move because now black gets to bring back the knight to the center without even wasting a move. Gukesh goes knight e5, and here also again white should have gone for something like a4 and start pushing the pawns, but here Parham just blunders with knight c4. Gukesh just takes queen c4. Here if white had gone queen e5, then the d1 rook is hanging. White goes rook d8, rook d8, and queen e5. But the problem here is this knight is very strong defending black's king. While this knight is here, I don't think white can create any kind of threats against the black king. Whereas white's king is very weak now, and Gukesh does exactly that and goes for it. Rook d1, rook b3, queen f1, king f3, queen h1, king f4, and rook d5. So hitting this rook, hitting the queen here, if white goes something like queen e7, then black can go knight h5 check, king e3, queen e1, and then picking up the queen. If white just gives a check here like queen b8, black just moves, threatening queen e4 mate. If white goes rook e3, then knight h5 is also mate. So after rook d5, white just resigns here, and with this, actually India has won the toughest board of Iran, where Gukesh was black actually, playing against the super strong Parham Maksudlu. And with this win, Gukesh almost guarantees that India is going to win the match because all the other boards are far lower than the first board. So we move on to the next game, that is Praggnanandhaa versus Amin Tabatabai. Both are very strong grandmasters with rating over 2700, and Praggnanandhaa was white here, so he had the advantage, but he actually couldn't get much out of this game. We will see now. He goes for the d4 opening, queen pawn. Black goes d5, very solid. c4, e6, knight f3, knight f6, g3, the Catalan opening. Bishop e7, bishop g2, castle, castle, and dc4. So this is the open variation of the Catalan, and it is very popular nowadays. White goes queen c2, a6, a4, bishop d7, queen c4, bishop c6, bishop f4. It's all very common theory till now. Black goes bishop d6, queen c1, h6, knight c3, knight d5. So as we can see, white has a very strong center and a lot of space, but on the other hand, black has developed all his pieces and will level up the knight with d7 and doesn't really have any kind of weaknesses. So it's just an equal position. White goes bishop d2, knight d7, rook d1, queen e8, a5. a5 is always a nice move to play because it takes a lot of space on the queen side and kind of cripples black's queen side play. So after a5, black goes f5, queen c2, knight f6, rook e1, hinting at some kind of e4 break in the future, but it's not really going to happen. Black goes rook d8, knight e5, knight b4, queen d2, queen b3, takes, and bishop e5. Now actually white has kind of ruined its position because after d5, black just takes on b2, queen b4, and queen c6. And as we can see, black has got his rook to the 7th rank, has a very strong queen on c6, and the knight is ready to jump to g4, hitting the e5 pawn. And white is also looking very clumsy because his central pawns have doubled up on the e file, and he doesn't really have any kind of advantage anymore. White goes king g1, knight d5, knight d5, queen d5, rook ac1, hitting this c7 pawn. So black can't really take here because the b7 pawn will be hanging. Rook f7, b3, rook d4, rook c4, rook d1, rook d1, queen d1. So black is also not really going for anything crazy and just settles for the draw because draw with black against Praggnanandhaa is always fine. King g2, queen d5, king g1. Black still tries to do something here, but this is not really enough now. White just plays e3. Problem with black is he can't really play queen f3 here because white will just go to d4 and cover up this d file, and black doesn't really have much. So black goes queen d1 and white just repeats with king g2 and queen d5, and a draw was agreed in this position. So with this game we are at 1.5 half, which is a very good position to be in because both the 2700 games are over and the last two boards are far lower rated than our Indian players. We move on to the third board, that is Arjun versus Daneshwar Vardia. Daneshwar is a very strong grandmaster for Iran, from Iran, who's a very young player. He defeated Grishuk in the last chess World Cup. After that, he became much more famous. So he plays a very solid kind of style, which is a bit contradicting to Arjun's style. So white goes knight f3, black goes d5, g3, knight f6, bishop g2, c5, grabbing the center, castles, e6, c4, and d4. So this is kind of a reversed Benoni structure where white says I'm going for the same structure as Benoni, but I'm one move up as white, so I cannot really be worse. White goes d3, knight c6, e3, knight d7. This is an interesting idea. If white goes ed4, then black will go knight c5 in the future after going f6, e5. So white just delays it and goes knight a3. Black goes e5. White could have still gone for something like ed4 or knight c2. But here he goes for an interesting knight h4. But black here just takes on e3, fe3, and just goes back, guarding the f5 square. White goes knight b5. Black goes bishop g4, developing with the tempo. Queen b3, queen d7, knight c3, rook d8. He has got all his pieces out almost. It will be even better if he can get bishop e7 and castle immediately. But white's position is not really looking that great because the d3 pawn is weak. e3 pawn is disrupting white's bishop, and white's king also is looking a bit loose. White goes knight d5. The only plus of the position for white is this d5 square where he can put a piece and it will be very strong. Black goes bishop e7, bishop d2, castle, rook a e1, bishop e6, e4, solidifying the d5 square. Black goes knight d4. The difference between the d4 square and d5 square is, even though d4 is also an outpost, but white can go bishop e3 and take it. But if black takes on d5, white will take with the pawn and this will be a protected pass pawn. So it's much better to have a knight on d5 than d4. White goes queen c3. Black still takes here, takes, and bishop g4. He says that I have a very strong knight on d4. You are not really immediately coming and taking it, and because you are 2 moves down, I can go something like f5 and open up the position before you take out my knight. So white goes bishop e3. Black just takes here, gh4 and f5. He got the extra move with bishop h4 and he just opens up the position with f5. If white takes here, then black can just go knight e2, rook e2, bishop e2. As I should mention that this is a very nice fork, getting the exchange. The problem with knight e2 first is white can just take here, bishop e2, f2, bishop g4, and white can take on e5 with a lot of compensation for the exchange with this nice center and this strong bishop which can come to c3. So after f5, white plays bishop d4, which is a very big mistake because he allowed the very nice cd4, queen c5 and f4. With this g2 bishop is now almost dead. This is a very strong protected pass pawn, and this king is going to be coming under a lot of pressure now. White goes rook f2, b6, queen b4, f3, bishop f1, bishop h5, clearing the way for the black queen to come. King h1, rook f6, h3, rook c8, taking away the only open file that white could capture. So white goes queen d2, threatening some kind of rook c1 now. Black goes rook g6, threatening queen e7, queen h4, and a mating attack on the king. White goes rook c1. Black doesn't exchange, of course. Black comes back to f8. The white, even though white has captured the c file, it doesn't really have any square to enter. White goes queen b4, h6, creating a square for the king so that this rook can jump to f4. White goes rook c2, f2, threatening rook g1. White goes rook c7. This is almost over. Rook g1, king f2. Here, Arjun plays a very brilliant move, that is rook f1, sacking the queen. He says that if you take rook f1, I'll just take the rook. So you have to take the queen, and after rook c1, you can't really stop my f pawn. If you try something like rook g7, I can just take here, queen e7, king g8, queen e6, rook f7, queen e8, king f7, and there's no more checks, and black is just winning the game. So after rook c1, then I should play this rook d6, surprising move, and then immediately resigned without waiting for black to play f1 queen. And with this win, we are actually winning the match already with 2.5 without even needing the last board to finish. So we move on to the final game, that is Vidit versus Idani. Vidit was almost like 120 points higher than him. So this was the best board we had. Even though we now currently don't need it because we have already won the match. But of course, e4, Vidit starts with black goes c5, knight f3, d6, d4, takes, knight f6, knight c3. So then he plays the Nasdorf after a6. Vidit goes for the Sozin variation, which is popularized by none other than Bobby Fischer. Black goes e6, bishop e3, b5, bishop b3, bishop b7, f3, knight c6. This is all very common theory. White goes queen e2, knight a5, long castle, getting the king to safety with some kind of e5 ideas in the future. Black takes out the Sozin bishop. White takes with the c pawn. Bishop e7, king b1, castle, and white goes for g4. This move is not a preparation, as we can say, because Vidit is down to 53 minutes here. But interestingly enough, there is a very nice refutation to this move. That is knight g4, fg4, b4, knight a4, bishop e4, king a1, and bishop h1. So with this, black has managed to get rid of the central pawns and has two very nice protected pass pawns in the center and a rook for two minor pieces. And in the middle game, this is definitely going to be better for black. But black doesn't really go for this. He goes b4 first, knight a4. He could still go for something like this, but he plays knight d7, missing the opportunity. White goes h4, queen a5, bishop g5, exchanging this bishop so that this d6 pawn will become weaker. Rook e8, takes h5, threatening h6 as now the dark square bishop is gone. Here black goes rook c8, which is a very bad move, allowing h6. White plays h6, g6, and queen d2. The queen on d2 is very strong because this keeps an eye on the b4 pawn. Sometimes it will go after the d6 pawn, and sometimes it can go to queen d4 and threaten a mate in 1 on g7. Black again goes wrong with knight f6. White goes rook e1 with the idea of e5 sometimes. Black goes rook c7, a3, and white just picks up this b4 pawn with the pin. Black goes knight d7, f4, e5. White just takes here. Black takes on e4. The only way to get the queen out, because as you can see, the queen is trapped. All the squares are controlled by white pieces. Black goes b4, rook e4, queen d5. Here white goes queen d3, which is just winning. Black goes knight f6, hitting this. If black had gone ed4 here, white just goes rook d4 and he's just clearly winning with 2 pawns up. So black has to complicate something here, but there's nothing left. After knight f6, white just comes back rook e1, queen d4, ed4, rook g5 first, so that black can't really take here and take here. Knight h5 and rook d4. So after everything has cleared, white is a whole pawn up, has a very strong pawn chain on the king side, and these 2 pawns are so big that it's going to be falling in like 1 or 2 moves. Also, this knight has a very wonderful square on d5. Black goes rook f8, trying to break this structure with f6. White just takes rook d6, knight f4, knight c5, stopping the knight e6 idea. Black still goes 96 because orders white will just start picking up the pawns here. If black wins something like knight h3, white can just go something for like knight d7 or even knight e4, threatening knight f6, and the knight is not really doing much on h3. Black goes knight e6, knight e6, f e6, rook a6. White has 3 pawns on the queen side, but it's actually triple pawns, but still it's enough to win. Black goes e5, b5, and white starts pushing the pawn because to prevent the pawn from winning, black has to go rook b8, rook b7, and just take the b6 pawn, which will help white to get rid of one pair of rooks, and then it's just an easy win. Black goes rook c5, b6, rook b8, rook a7. Now these pawns are coming in handy, creating mating threats against the black king. Black goes rook b5, rook g7, king h8, and rook c1. White is threatening rook c7, and it's just mate here because black takes rook b6, rook c7, rook b3. White takes on h7, king g8, rook g7, king f8, and rook h8 checkmate because the pawn is protecting the g7 rook. And so after rook c1, black just resigns, and white wins the game. So with this win, India wins the match against Iran with the huge margin of 3.5, which was just unbelievable. And India is almost on the verge of getting the gold on this chess Olympiad. So if you guys like this kind of content and want to see more of this, please like and subscribe. And if you have any kind of suggestions, please put it in the comment section. I'll definitely try to improve. And thank you for sticking till now. And we'll see you guys tomorrow with the recap of round 9. Just 3 more rounds to go. See you. Bye bye.